might come in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel the need for speed.
Roads, where we're going, we don't need roads.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Film Nerd Podcast. I am Vince, and for episode 32, I am joined by a repeat guest, Mr. Andrew Johnson. He was previously on episode 24 where we talked about Bo Burnham's Inside. Did a little interview with him as well about his experience at Belmont University, where he's a graduate in film studies and production, and talked about him living in LA and working as a freelance production designer. Got some other things on the horizon, but yeah, Andrew, how you doing, man?
Oh, dude, I'm doing great. It's great weather out here. I was back in Michigan the other week, and it was a little chilly.
Yeah, we were talking before I started recording. I said, it's another Thursday in January in Michigan out here.
Oh, it's 8 gray. Weeks. The snow's brown. The cars.
The snow's
everywhere.
Actually almost gone. We haven't really had much snow, at least in mid-Michigan, the Lansing area. The snow's almost off the ground. Very icy. It is freezing. It's like teens right now. Very bitter cold.
It's probably 65 right now. So it just went down. So it's a little chilly for us.
Yeah, chilly. 65 is my kind of weather. That's shorts weather for me.
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
So how's life been in 2021? How'd that wrap up? I think we talked, last summer? I'm trying to remember when we did that episode. It was probably back in June, something like that.
Gosh, it was a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
But life's been good. I took a lot of this kind of back end of the 2021 year off, worked a ton through the middle of it. But, with COVID and everything, a lot of things slowed down. Still a lot of music videos, a lot of music docs, but other than that, not too much.
Yeah, I was curious how that would work out with things kind of, I don't want to say resuming complete normalcy, but obviously there's been some things with film and media and the stuff that you work in that's somewhat resumed back to normal in quotes, but still a lot of restrictions and issues, and obviously the new variant's kind of running rampant right now. So actually I just got over COVID.
Yeah.
So I think everyone's
it's definitely causing havoc. I was talking to a producer the other day that said they can usually count on about 30% of their crews testing positive for bigger shoots. So
oh man. Yeah, I feel like at that point you just have to quarantine everybody for 10 days and then try and see what you can do from there.
If people test positive, you got to do all the contact tracing, make sure that nobody, it's a tough game right now, but everybody's working through it. So
doing what we got to do during these weird and trying times, right?
Yep.
But at the end of the day, we still got movies, right? And speaking of which, I don't know how many movies you end up watching in 2021. I'm a big Letterboxd guy. I'm still working on putting out a video and a post with my final 2021 list. I got 20-ish more movies I want to try and get through before I do that. I think 2021 started out kind of meh, but it ended, I thought, pretty strongly. I thought the last 3 months of the year had some great movies. Was there anything that for you that you saw last year that kind of stuck out?
Oh man, it's tough for me because I bounce around so often watching so many different movies. Like my favorite movie that I watched in 2021 was not a 2021 movie.
What movie was that?
It's a movie called Baby Teeth. It's on Hulu.
I watched it.
Oh my gosh.
I did watch it. I included it in my 2020 list.
Oh my goodness. That's honestly, that probably made my top 5 favorite films all time. I mean, just for how that movie treats every single subject. I mean, I don't know. It was one of those things where at the end I was just in tears.
It's
I love that movie.
Very emotionally powerful film, for sure.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that movie a lot. A lot of the two main characters. The one actor plays the male. Almost antagonist. He's kind of like the main antagonist in the film in the sense. I don't think I'd ever seen him in anything before, and he was really great.
Oh my goodness. Like the best modern bad boy in an indie film that I had probably ever seen. Just so good.
Bad boy, Australian boy, right?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh man, he's a heartthrob.
he was good. I really liked his performance a lot. I thought he brought a lot to that role. That movie, if I remember correctly, had some very distinct camera work too. I watched it a while ago, but I remember enjoying it quite a bit. Didn't love it as much as you, but I remember that I did enjoy it. Anything else that stuck out?
What else came out in 2021? I'm really bad about remembering.
Dune, man. Did you see Dune? Did you get a chance to see Dune?
Yes. Dune was amazing. And me and my girlfriend went and saw Dune, and we were waiting. We were like, okay, when's the second one come out? Because
oh yeah,
we're, can we stay in the theater until the next one comes out? It was amazing. Yeah.
I think, excuse me, I think they confirmed 2023. I think it's sometime next year. It's not going to come out this year, unfortunately, but
which isn't that's not too long for a sequel film of that size to come out.
Yeah, but what was kind of crazy that I read is Denis Villeneuve didn't get the money to film part 1 and 2 back to back, like so something like Lord of the Rings, where they filmed all 3 films 3 years in a row without stopping production. Basically, he was allowed to make this movie, and they wanted to see how well it was received. And then he had basically already written a second script, but they hadn't started pre-production. And then it was like...
Which they're stupid for doing that, because the guy's a genius. I mean, the guy doesn't do bad work.
Yeah, but as you know, an industry at this point, it's driven very heavily by money. And his last blockbuster, I like to call it an art house blockbuster film, with Blade Runner 2049, didn't... Sure. I think it might have barely broke even. It did not really. It was an expensive movie for what it was, very expensive, but didn't make much money. Dune did pretty well, especially for having the day and date, whatever it's called, release, where it was on HBO Max and theaters. I think it still made about 400 million worldwide, even with being on streaming at the same time. So it actually did pretty decent.
You know what the budget was on that?
It was something like 250 million.
So
200 million
broke even.
Maybe broke even, yeah. But they said a lot of people started subscriptions on HBO Max just for the purpose of seeing it. So it's been said that likely HBO is fine, because of all their subscriptions that people joined and paid for to just see that movie. So who knows if that ends up working out well or not. One that I saw recently, I don't know if you were able to see this one, but it was nominated for the 2020 Oscars, but was released in 2021 because of the goofy thing they did last year where films were eligible like up into March, was The Father. And Anthony Hopkins actually won. I haven't
had a chance to see that yet.
I just finally watched it. It made at this point it's snug in my top 5. I mean, it's phenomenal. About a father dealing and daughter, and she's dealing with her dad with dementia. And it's based on a play, and the woman who wrote and directed the play wrote and directed the film adaptation too.
Oh, weird. I love when that
done
happens.
Very well. Yeah, it's done very well. Did you see French Dispatch or Licorice Pizza?
I have not seen Licorice Pizza yet. I saw French Dispatch. Really enjoyed that one. I'm looking through the 2021 films right now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, of course, all these films I love.
The Green Knight. Green Knight was great.
Didn't see The Green Knight. Pig. I mean, Pig I've seen like 4 times now. I mean, I've
only watched it once. I need to rewatch it. I loved it too.
I just I can't. At the end when he, hey, spoilers. At the end when he cooks the meal, I'm like, I'm expecting this guy to just start fucking killing people, and he steps in and like his aggression is this meal. That movie was so good. Very
subversive. Your expectations are subverted more than once in that film.
Yep. I really enjoyed The Tender Bar, but that was like
I haven't
one of
watched
my favorite
that
books.
yet. I haven't with Ben Affleck. It's on Amazon Prime, right?
Yeah.
I heard it was okay. It had okay reviews. I didn't buy the. Do you recommend it? The reviews look pretty lukewarm, so I wasn't sure.
I'm biased based on the fact that I read that book in college, and it was like one of my favorite books that I had read up to that point. I need to reread the book because I saw things in the movie that I'm like, I feel like that happens in the book, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it for what it was. But I do think, last one for 2021 as I'm looking at these, Tick, Tick, Boom was...
I just watched that
really fun
the other day. I love that with Andrew Garfield.
Yeah.
Lin-Manuel Miranda's directorial debut. He has not directed a film. as much as he's worked in Hollywood since developing Hamilton, he has not actually directed a movie yet. That was his debut. So really, really good.
I loved that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, it got some love at the Golden Globes I saw. So hopefully get some love at the Oscars too. Two more I want to mention really quick that got no love at the box office, very sadly, because I think these are two. They're currently in my top 10. One of them is my number one film of the year, and that was Guillermo del Toro's new movie, Nightmare Alley. And then Ridley Scott's period epic piece, The Last Duel. Those movies made nothing. They were box office bombs, sadly. And I wish they hadn't, because they were great. I love them both. And if anyone's out there looking for a couple of 2021 movies, check out. Gotta watch them.
I haven't seen either of those yet. I've been meaning to see Nightmare Alley. I just, like, when you get caught up with work, you're like, you can't make it to the movies. But no,
that was me all fall. I didn't see any movies all fall because I coach football, so I know.
And you feel like you've missed out on so much. But movies are staying they're like 3-4 weeks and they're done. You know, it's changing. So many. Movies don't
stay in the box office like they used to. I mean, there's movies I remember growing up that would be in the theater for like 3 months, 2 or 3 months, 8 to 10 weeks. You know, like, you don't see that anymore. I mean, it's kind of a revolving door now, unfortunately.
Did you have a chance to see Belfast?
No, it's on my list. Belfast, Come On, with Joaquin Phoenix was another one I haven't had a chance to see yet that I've heard good things about.
I really, really enjoyed Belfast. I was in the theater alone, and that's
how I go to every movie. I go to every movie alone. So pretty much every movie I listed, if I saw it in the theater, it was by myself. So
yeah. But I mean, like, there was nobody in the theater, so it was just like a fun watch to just, sit back, relax, enjoy some popcorn.
That's my favorite when there's no one else in there. Especially if you go, I don't know about you, but I always try to go if I can find time on a weekday. Being a teacher in the summer, I always try to go like on a weekday in the middle of the day, and there's nobody
like a
there.
3 p.m. showing and nobody's there. Yeah.
No, I'll go to like a 10 a.m. even, or a noon.
We don't have that out here.
they didn't have we had them forever at NCG in Lansing here until COVID, but now they're starting to bring back, because when they opened back up, it was only like 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. and later. Right. And now they're starting to get back. I love 10 a.m. showings. There's no one there.
We're starting to edge towards like 1 p.m., but other than that, it's pretty late. And they just stack the showings on top of each other.
See, there's too many people, and then they just piss me off, and the people are annoying. I don't remember the last time. It's been a while since before COVID, I think, since I went to like an opening night showing of a film. I don't think every movie I've seen since COVID has started, it's when theaters have opened back up, I've gone.
Sure. There is no opening night anymore. I mean, I remember seeing The Hunger Games with a bunch of friends in NCG. The entire theater was Hunger Games at midnight. Every single theater was sold out, and it was Hunger Games at midnight.
Yeah.
Now they start at like 4 p.m. It's not.
I remember even doing that with as recently as like Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Where you were let in, and then you just like chose an auditorium to go into.
Right.
And they were all showing the same movie at the same time.
And it was magical. It was fun because like I wasn't one of those people that dressed up or anything, but to see all of those people there that did that, I mean, it's just like, it's fun to see because people, it really shows the love that people have for storytelling and whatnot. It's just a fun experience.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's a fun experience. I mean, it's a communal experience that you can't really get anywhere else.
Right.
There's no supplement for that. It's just such a unique, the movie going experience in general, especially like those midnight showings. There's just no, there's no other place that you get to have, an experience with hundreds or even thousands of people who all want to go and see the same thing, experience the same thing together. And it's it's very cool. It was too bad we lost it for a while. And like you said, it's not even really back to how it was. I feel like you're not really even seeing those late night showings anymore. But
no, everything comes out at 4 p.m. on Thursday. And
well, and speaking of which, we're going to talk about two movies that did not get theatrical releases, two films that were released on streaming, two films that have received a lot of buzz, a lot of praise, The Tragedy of Macbeth and The Power of the Dog. We're going to start our conversation here with The Tragedy of Macbeth, which is the more recent release, which just came out on Apple TV Plus. If I'm not mistaken, it was last Friday. Today is the 20th, 21st is tomorrow. Last Friday, the 14th, I believe, January 14th was when it was released. It had a New York Film Festival release in September last year, and then a limited release on Christmas. It was not, I don't know about you, but it was not released in theaters anywhere near me. They just, they do that to try and get it into the 2021 Oscar race.
Right. It might have been in some art house theaters here, maybe a couple bigger theaters, but only for like a week or so.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of anywhere around here. So, for me, I'm counting this as a 2022 release because it's quote unquote wide release was on Apple TV Plus. Apple TV Plus partnered with A24 for this movie. So A24 was actually the production company for this. A24 most often distributes. They're starting to produce more and more, but I felt like early on, a lot of their films, they were just distributing them, not necessarily the one financially backing them. And this is a rare solo effort from Joel Cohen, a Cohen brother working all by himself. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I was reading that his brother Ethan apparently doesn't want to make movies anymore. I saw that in an article, which I was not aware that he had put out a statement like that. I wasn't really following them closely in the news or anything, but when I saw that he was doing this film alone, I kind of looked into it, and yeah, apparently he's just happy, content with being quote unquote retired. I don't know if he's officially retired or just wants to take some time away, but Joel Cohen wrote the screenplay adapting William Shakespeare's legendary play Macbeth, played with the title a little bit, kind of renamed it. This is actually, I was looking it up, it is something like the 13th adaptation ever of this film, 13th or 14th ever. It's only like the 6th or 7th though feature length since like 1940, because in the 1910s and 1900s there was like a bunch of 15-minute silent film adaptations of Macbeth. So like official feature length adaptations is something like the 6th or 7th. I love the 2015 adaptation from Justin Kurzel with what's his name? I can't think of the actor's name off the top of my head. I lost it. It's going to kill me. I can see his face. I got it pulled up. Hold on right here. Michael Fassbender. Good Lord. Michael Fassbender in the 2015 film stars as Macbeth, and Marion Cotillard. I can never remember how to say her last name. She's a great actress, plays Lady Macbeth. But yeah, I love this movie. I know you and I texted that you were not super familiar in terms of like having read Shakespeare. Like I'm sure the story. I mean, I feel like most people know it. We read a little bit of it
in high school, and the general story, but the overarching, everything I was unaware of,
Yeah. What'd you think of it?
Dude, it was so good. I mean, especially once you texted me and you were like, do you know anything about German Expressionism? And I said, whoa, hey, let me turn this movie on right now. Especially, that stuff is just so fun to watch.
Have you watched a lot of German Expressionism films?
I mean, in college,
I guess I should start with this for anyone listening. If you don't know what German Expressionism is, it was a very popular style of film that came out in the 1920s from Germany post World War I. And essentially, Joel Cohen went into this film like planning to film it to look like a modern day Fritz Lang film. And actually right here, I got right next to me one of his most famous movies. If you're watching on YouTube, I got Metropolis, 1922, I believe. Fritz Lang was a very popular German Expressionism director. And so Andrew, being a production designer, German Expressionism is really all about the look. It's a visual aesthetic, kind of a mood and atmosphere. And all the films that were coming out from Germany at that time, a lot of them had this look and feel that was very distinct. If you kind of want to take it from there from me.
Yeah, I mean, the set designs were expansive, and I think that that's still an understatement in what they were. painted on deep shadows, very, very dark blacks and very, very bright whites. I mean, it's just like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but German Expressionism, for the most part, coming out of Germany, it was a lot of horror film.
Yes. Speaking of which, I also have this next to me right here. If you're watching Nosferatu, and actually this is 1922, Metropolis 1927, but Nosferatu is a famous German Expressionism horror film. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which I also have on my shelf behind me. That's another one, very famous German Expressionism film. Yeah, a lot of horror films. Not all of them, but a lot of them were horror films, that's for sure. And something else. I think
a lot of that drew from, post World War I and in Germany kind of coming out of World War I. I mean, basically, in shambles, and these German directors, taking a very, very new medium and using it to their advantage. It's stunning work. Really is.
They were really, to my knowledge, some of the first films to come out of Germany, because Hollywood was already getting started at that time. You had, Charlie Chaplin had already made his way over there and was putting out, films by the time German Expressionism. I mean, Charlie Chaplin's The Kid came out in 1921, which was like his directorial debut. So he was already getting started in Hollywood. In terms of Hollywood being internationally distributed, not, obviously not at that time, but in terms of movies that we think of today, Hollywood was already getting started, and German Expressionism is I think a type of film and a genre, but also again an aesthetic that I don't feel like people are as aware of as they should be. And I love that Joel Cohen approached his modern Macbeth adaptation with a not so modern aesthetic in mind. And I think the reason, I was reading an interview that you just mentioned, I think he wanted this to be like a horror film because the story is a tragedy and it's kind of horrifying.
Yeah. I mean, and he nailed it. It just nailed it. I mean, some of the shots in the staging in this movie are fascinating, to say the least. I just there's one point where Macbeth is standing in the courtyard off to the side in a bunch of pillars, and there's something going on in the courtyard, and that's well lit, and the shadow and the light casts down, and Francis McDormand comes out, from afar. That takes so much brain power. I'm in awe watching this movie every time.
Well, I don't know how much you read into the set design. Did you read they filmed the entire movie on a soundstage?
When I was watching it, I had figured that that's what they had done.
Yep.
But yeah, no, it's amazing to me that people can walk into a room every day and create an hour and 40-minute movie in a big cement building that people have come in and made sets for. It stuns me every time.
And I mean, there's something to be said too that he's like really going full German Expressionism, not even just with the aesthetic, but like how they would have approached it too. Because in the 1920s, they weren't really going on location. Films weren't being filmed on location. They were filmed in studios and sound stages, with sets.
Especially with German Expressionism, it was all set builds and such.
Yes, so that was part of the aesthetic. Was these very harsh looking models and images that were, like you just said, they were all built, they were all created in the background, and you can tell they went for that here. And I like that you mentioned some of the use of lighting too, that reflects some of those shadows of the very geometrically, like they're keeping in mind geometry, because that's a big part of it too, very distinct angles, right, and harsh shapes. And then using those shadows to kind of create this really eerie mood and visual set pieces. Stairwells, you got lots of shots with stairways, staircases and balconies. Big
and another
rooms.
Thing that they do with the staircase that, it is definitely German expressionism, but also verges into, Russian montage and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
But the Dutch angles of the
Yes.
stairs, I mean, this guy is just, it's always really fascinating when directors are really big film buffs, because you see what they're, taking from, and it makes the films 10 times more enjoyable. It just really does.
Yeah, and I've heard, I can't remember if it was Quentin Tarantino, but I remember watching an interview or listening to an interview of a director. I think it was Tarantino, said something like along the lines of what you were just saying, like they all have like a bag of tricks, right, that they pull into, and their background in terms of, especially if they're like a big film buff and they have knowledge of these different time periods of film and different aesthetics from different countries and different directors' styles, and they kind of pull from here and pull from there. That's really modern art in general, is your influences, right? What are you being influenced by? But it's such a, I don't know. Do you think this is a really out there? I love it. I absolutely love everything about this film. But think about going into it. Do you think this is a super out there approach to present this very famous, all-time story in 1920s German expressionism, and as like a horror film? I just wonder who else would have thought of that. Like, what a cool idea.
Right. I don't know that it was an out there decision, but I'm sure that when, Joel came to, the studios and whatnot, and his team had, brought together, one thing that also sticks in my mind is when they're in that, I don't even know what to call it, the round, where there's a bunch of windows and there's a singular circular light coming through, and part of the light is shining onto one of the windows, and Macbeth sits off to the side of that. But I'm sure just like a pencil drawing of that, or a pencil drawing of really any scene in this movie, you would have looked at that and the idea that he had and said, that's genius. Absolutely. No way. Here's all my money. Go and make this movie. I can't, when you see stuff like that, you're just blown away, because it's so hard to make a bad movie, how immensely difficult it is to make a good movie or a great movie. It just blows my mind.
There's a lot of average movies out there. There's a lot of very meh movies. Yeah, there's a lot of
which
meh
are
movies.
Totally difficult to make. Totally difficult.
It's a different approach, that's for sure. But I love the way he went about this movie with its visuals. I love the use of German expressionism, and to me, it's ironic because I've just in the last 3 years of my life started deep diving and watching some of the films from that era. So up until the 3 or 4 years ago, I wasn't really that familiar with it. And so I love that I've recently been able to watch some of those films and then see this movie and be like, wow, he's like nailing this time period of filmmaking. What did you think of so obviously this is a very intimidating work too. I can't imagine as a filmmaker or any sort of creative to take a work of fiction that is so internationally renowned and has been famous for hundreds of years, and say, I'm going to adapt this, especially Shakespeare, because Shakespeare, not only is it very famous and challenging in its own right, but then it has Shakespeare created his own language. I mean, Shakespearean language is its own. It's literally a different language. They're speaking English, but you got to interpret everything they're saying, because it's like they're speaking in this very ambiguous poetic style of English. Because I don't know about you, but I remember in high school, that was one of the most challenging parts is trying to break down the language. And it helps now, for me, much later in my life, I feel like, having watched so many films and read a lot of things, that I can analyze it better in real time than I would have if I would have watched this movie when I was 15. I would have been like, I'm done. I don't know what the hell's going
way.
on. I don't know
that was me watching Apocalypse Now at 15. I was like, this was a good movie, but what just happened? But I mean, it took me a second watch this morning of Macbeth to really understand some of the stuff, especially because I don't know the language very well. I didn't read a ton of it, which is probably my fault. But a second watch on this movie, and you picked up I picked up so much more of the metaphor that goes on in the film.
They're pretty much
more
speaking
beautiful.
always in metaphors and symbolism, like to constantly be speaking like in poem, like you're basically speaking in very heavy metaphorical poem is what the best in layman's terms, I guess, that I could describe Shakespearean language. So like where I was going with that is just to approach that as an actor in a modern film. I can't imagine, especially someone like Denzel, who has done so many famous films, but like nothing like this before. Denzel plays Lord Macbeth in this film, and I think it's one of his best performances ever, honestly, because it's such a different performance from him. Especially because, spoilers for Macbeth, I guess we should have said this already, but if you don't know the story of Macbeth, then I guess you skipped high school English class. Macbeth is basically, it's a tragedy. He's an evil character. He turns evil. I don't know if you could label him evil. He just makes evil decisions. He ends up committing murder. And so to see Denzel in probably his first bad guy role in a long time. I mean, one of his most famous roles is playing a bad guy in Training Day, but I mean, I think he kills it as Macbeth in this, and Frances McDormand's pretty great as Lady Macbeth. I mean, she's also good in everything she does as well.
Fantastic. Literally so good.
The one, honestly, as good as they were, the one standout for me was Catherine Hunter. And she is the actress who played the witches. She was terrifying. Like her like cadence and approach to the language, and then what she would do with her voice. Because if you don't know Macbeth, he's told these premonitions or these what are they called? Geez, I can't think of what it's called. Not like predictions, but why can't I think of the word? Prophecy. Prophecy.
Yeah, prophecy. There you go.
I'm like going around the word, trying to think what it's called. Prophecies. He's told these prophecies of him that he's going to become a king by these three witches. But in the film, it's one woman who's playing all three at the same time. She just speaks with different voices and cadences to represent three different witches. And there's a few times where they visually like show two more witches standing beside her. Like I'm thinking of the opening scene where she's like moving, she's contorting. She's also, the actress also like a contortionist, and she's like moving all around. And then she like fades into the background and two more images of witches appear by her. It's just really adds to the horror element of the film.
I mean, it's the same thing with the water right after that, and the reflections. Yeah,
that's a great scene too.
Yeah, so
I really hope she gets some love at the Oscars, because I thought she was great.
She's fabulous. Yeah, I mean the whole movie is put together so well, and I'm always really interested when not only somebody like Denzel, but I forget his name, who plays Dudley in Harry Potter. Harry
Melling, I believe.
Yeah, he comes in and gives a really good performance. It's always fun to see that. It's just always fun.
He was in, did you ever see The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, the last another Coen Brothers movie?
I did when it came out, which was 2019?
2018, I think.
2018. Yeah, I saw when it came out.
He was in that too. It's an anthology film, so there's like 4 short stories or whatever, and he's in one of them in that as well. And I remember when I first saw that, I didn't recognize him because he'd lost so much weight since Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but he's done a few films since that I've noticed him. Also, Corey Hawkins plays Macduff in the film, who I haven't seen him in a lot, but he's very famous. The last 6 years because of Straight Outta Compton. He played Dr. Dre in Straight Outta Compton. Yep. So he was really good in that, but this to me was a much different performance, obviously, than that. I thought he was great. Really like the music in this too. It's still the Coen brothers, the same collaborator they've had for all their films for music, Carter Burwell. I really liked his score for this film too. I thought that really stood out. Very ominous. A lot of string instruments, and really creates, in addition to the German expressionism visual aesthetic, the music really helps re-emphasize that tone and atmosphere, the really eerie and kind of creepy horror aspect he's going for in this movie.
It's like very emblematic of several things that happen throughout the movie is the wind. It's very emblematic of just kind of the flowing of the air and then the rushes of wind and the leaves and everything. It's just such a well put together movie for such a daunting task. Like, I wonder if Joel was like, this is what I want to do, or if somebody brought it to him. I wonder what went into him deciding he wanted to do it. I haven't read anything about it, so.
No, I haven't looked into why he decided this was the project that he would take on solo. Again, I'd have to go look in the Coen brothers filmography. I don't know if they've ever directed films alone. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I'd have to go look. If this is not the first, it's only one of a couple. Because to my knowledge, they've pretty much directed every film together that they've worked on. But very surprising film. Not surprising that it's good. I always expect the Coen brothers, anything they do, to be good. But it's surprising to me just the kind of film, because this is so unlike anything the Coen brothers have done in terms of like style and aesthetic, the source material. They haven't, a lot of their films are very character driven, whereas, Shakespeare is very character driven stories. So I guess that would be, something that's similar there. But man, this is going to be hard. This is the first 2020 official release. 2022 official release film I've seen. It's gonna be hard for this one to be knocked out of my at least top 5. I don't know. It's gonna be hard for this to be knocked anywhere past 5 on my list next year when I wrap it up. I gave this a 5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, 10 out of 10. The source material speaks for itself, but to go out and adapt this the way he did, like we've been saying, it's so impressive. I loved every second of it. If you don't like Shakespeare, I know people don't necessarily like Shakespeare, then you're probably not going to enjoy it. But if you can get by,
I don't know. I think even if you don't like Shakespeare, I think that this is something that if you can get past, if you don't like subtitles, don't watch this movie, because like if you can't sit and be patient with a movie, you won't like this. But if you can sit and be patient with a movie, I think you'd enjoy this. Whether you like Shakespeare or not, I think if you can be patient with it, it's a great watch.
It's very fast paced too. Most plays are. It's not like movies where like you could have a hangout movie where scenes just kind of meander. Plays plays, which this is an adaptation of a play. They're very boom, 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 scene. And I think that's another thing, is the editing of this film is very tight. There's not really any dull moments. He really keeps it tight to the scenes and the dialogue, from what he's adapting, and still manages in the short run time, as quickly paced as it is, to pack so much into the scenes visually, which is, again, that's Joel Coen's contribution to the story, is the overall visual look. He's just taking, what's written off the page and then going, how do I want this to come out of my brain and look on the screen? And I feel like like everything we've been talking about, he packs so much into this movie to give it his own taste, his own flair, and really put his name on, all the legendary adaptations of this play. I would think Shakespeare would be proud of this adaptation.
Oh yeah.
I love it.
All right, should we move on to Power of the Dog? Dang old dog.
We I think have said about everything that we can about the Tragedy of Macbeth. So yeah, let's do this. Let's wrap it up here and move on to our last movie that we're going to talk about. So the second and final film that we're going to talk about here is out on Netflix. So like I mentioned, both these movies did not really get theatrical releases. Netflix supposedly does limited releases with their films. The Power of the Dog, which came out on Netflix back in November. I watched it. I just this week watched it for a second time. I hadn't got around to a second viewing. I wanted to make sure before Andrew and I talked that I did. Jane Campion wrote and directed this film. She adapted it from a 1967 novel, also called The Power of the Dog, which apparently I was reading. I don't know how familiar you are with this. I wasn't at all. I just looked it up. Apparently the novel was one that was relatively unknown for decades until it got a republication in 2001. And somehow that's how Jane Campion got a hold of it. And she read it and was determined to get the rights to it to make it into a film. So this entire film is definitely a Jane Campion project that she championed. Little pun there. She's really the driving force behind this movie. And now I texted you about this. I love this movie. I embarrassingly enough was not familiar with Jane Campion at all. She's a New Zealand director. I had heard of, I think, one of her films, but wasn't sure who. The Piano. I had heard about The Piano, which is a 1990s film. I'd always heard it's a really good movie, but I wasn't aware of the director. She, in my defense, hasn't done that many movies. In a little over 3 decades, she is
Power
only...
of the Dog was the first one she had done in, I think, 12 or 14 years. Yeah.
12
so
years.
It's been a long time. Yeah.
In 32 years, she's only directed 8 movies. So she doesn't make a lot of films. So I wasn't that familiar.
Which is still crazy. That's still so many films to make.
Yeah.
8 films is just, it's a wild feat.
What did you think about this one, Andrew? I loved it, man.
I enjoyed this one so much, and then on a second watch, loved it even more, and then on a third watch, loved it even more, because it's just such a well-made movie. And I love movies that they'll give you everything in the first 5 to 10 minutes.
Yep.
Everything that you need in the first 5 to 10 minutes, and then they slowly unravel this story throughout the whole thing, and then pack a punch at the end. I mean, to me,
the build,
that build,
the building, and you're building. And like what you're saying, I remember my first watch. The whole time I'm like, what's going to happen here? Like, I remember thinking, like, I thought maybe I knew where it's going, but then when it came to a conclusion, I was like, that wasn't really where I was anticipating this to go.
First question, did you read a log line or a synopsis of it before you watched it?
Maybe on Letterboxd. I honestly don't remember. I did not watch a trailer. I watched no trailers, no previews. I honestly don't think going into it I knew much about it at all. Even who was in it, because my new thing is, in the last couple of years, I really like, if I hear a movie's really good, it's getting a lot of buzz, and if I hadn't seen anything other than people like praising it online, I'll avoid things about it and just go in blind. I love going in blind to movies.
Yeah.
So I maybe had read a quick snippet on Letterboxd, but I wasn't even aware who was in this. So when I started watching, I didn't know Jesse Plemons was in it. I didn't know Kirsten Dunst was in it. I think I knew Benedict Cumberbatch was in it. I didn't know Cody Smith McPhee was in it. And I couldn't believe he's like 8 feet tall now. That kid has grown so much since I remember seeing him in the Dawn of the whichever Planet of the Apes movie he was in.
Yeah, right.
He's like 8 feet tall now. He's gotten so tall.
Yeah.
But yeah, why do you ask?
I only asked that because I thought I'd read this on IMDb, but I must have been mistaken, because after the first watch, and then I watched it again with my girlfriend who hadn't read anything to see what her view of the movie was. I had read a short synopsis, like 3 sentences, that was just what the movie was about. And it had in it that the main character is a closeted gay man. And it ruined the movie for me. It ruined the movie, because
that does kind of ruin it for you. I didn't know. See, going in, I didn't know the exploration of sexuality portion. I didn't know anything about that.
It killed me. It killed me, because I was really bitterly disappointed, because the first part where it's Buck, right? That's the Buck. I think Buck Owens, but what's his name? His name's Buck. The guy that used to run the ranch.
Oh, Bronco Henry.
There you go.
His Benedict Cumberbatch, who his character's name is Phil. It was like his mentor, who has passed away. Spoil it already. Spoilers for the Power of the Dog.
Whatever.
If people should expect if we're discussing the film, spoilers. But yeah, Bronco Henry was his mentor. Yep.
But I was so disappointed when he pulls, and we'll get to the beginning of the film, but when he pulls the saddle out and starts really greasing it down, I was so bitterly disappointed, because I think that is such an important part of the movie that leads to the ending, that if you knew that about Benedict's character, it gives up the cinematic quality of the movie. It just it was a bummer, but on a second and third watch, right, what happened. So it was definitely great to see it, a couple more times.
But I know what you're saying too, because going into this movie, I didn't know that part. I actually pulled up Letterboxd smartly does not ruin that. Letterboxd's very brief synopsis just says charismatic rancher Phil Burbank inspires fear and awe in those around him. When his brother brings home a new wife and her son, Phil torments them until he finds himself exposed to the possibility of love, which you could call that maybe a spoiler, but it's very ambiguous because it doesn't say who he loves.
Right. No, that doesn't give away anything. What I read, it just really upset me.
Yeah, because what he's talking about, if you haven't seen the film, you're having it spoiled for you. What the hell are you doing? You should go watch it first because it's a great movie. It's on Netflix. But the first half. I'd say the first half. Because I think when we really know, okay, he is definitely struggling with his sexuality. He is certainly gay and is hiding it from everyone around him. Is the moment when he is in his little sanctuary. He has this place in the woods off the ranch he goes to, and there's like a little pond that he goes to by himself, and he bathes there. And there's a whole sequence when he's alone, and he has Bronco Henry's handkerchief. It has his initials on it, BH, and he masturbates with it. He's gets all sexual with the handkerchief. You're like, okay.
Yeah, spoiler alert, there is Benedict Ween in this movie.
You see full frontal Benedict nudity.
I said, woo!
You see, there's a lot of, quoting South Park, if you've never seen the South Park satire Game of Thrones, a lot of floppy wiener. There's a lot of floppy wiener. There's a whole sequence where all these naked guys are bathing in the river too. I'm like, Jane Campion getting all the male nudity that's not usually in films. Good for her. I like it.
Just a throwback to her first movie, Sweetie. There is the scene where there's a couple sitting on a bed, fully nude, and the shot is just overhead of them. And I said, "Whoa, hey, hello! This is not an American movie." Let me.
Hey,
tell
you're
you
spoiling that for me. I haven't seen those movies.
That's okay. That doesn't spoil anything.
No, but I think it's about that halfway point when you're finally tipped off. But you're talking about so I just rewatched it. If you rewatch it, and even on the first watch, you're like, there's a lot of visual. That's the only thing I love about this movie is there's very little exposition. Very little exposition. A lot of the storytelling is visual. You got to pay attention. There's something that happens later in the film that I'll tell you in just a second. I actually didn't understand the first time. I missed it. I was kind of confused. And I was like, oh, especially on rewatch, okay, I get it now. Because they're piecing things together for you visually without telling you anything. If you're not watching or at least actively engaged in piecing things together, you might miss it. And it kind of ties into the end of the movie. But there's stuff in the first half of this film that on second watch you're like, oh, he is actively pushing against his feelings and overcompensating, and that's a big theme of the movie is toxic masculinity and the way he emotes and the way that he treats people, especially effeminate men like Cody McPhee is his character, Pete, is him he's just self-conscious, right? He's trying to push down his own feelings, and he does this and tries to hide it from other people by trying to act like, oh, I'm a man's man. I'm gonna, put people down, and this is how a man behaves. And he always says these things about Bronco Henry, but I think it's these are the best kind of movies, in my opinion, where you can go back and pick up those little things on rewatch, some of those visual cues.
So just a small thing. Everything in this movie is built.
Oh, absolutely.
The outside of everything is built. The kitchen in the house was built inside of the house, and then everything else is on a stage.
Yep.
And they took something like a year to build it.
Yeah, because where are you going to find something like this in modern America? You're not.
It's so specific, yeah. And they shot in New Zealand because they prepped it over.
I did read that.
Yeah, they prepped it over a year. Jane Campion and the cinematographer Ari Wegner basically spent a year together, shot listing almost every day, and then visiting the sets to see how they were coming and whatnot. And I think I read an interview that Ari Wegner said that maybe like 90 to 95% of the shots were completely shot listed before the movie even started. So, I mean, that's just, it's just they had a plan, they had everything, and they executed to almost perfection. I mean, really.
Well, and I think with her, again, if you check out any interviews with her about this movie, her passion for this novel, how excited she was to adapt it, I think, you know, shows in the final product that, and kind of
20 years to live with a novel is a long time to then adapt it. That's a long time.
Yeah. So I think, you know, she obviously was very invested in this project and was determined for it to, you know, be a success and, you know, give her best product. And, you know, I kind of want to get back to something that I missed, you know, talking about some of the visual stuff in this movie and, you know, talking about building and building and building. Again, major spoilers. Cody Smith-McPhee's character is basically by the end of the movie is being groomed, right, by Phil, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, and it's kind of implied that Phil was groomed by Bronco Henry. It's never really overtly said. I think it can be interpreted by some of the things that he talks about and then how his behavior is. You know, and that's kind of the theme of this movie is people preying on each other, you know, and that's, I don't know if you know, the title of the film comes from the Bible. It's actually read, well, you probably remember it's read in the movie, and it has to do with when Jesus is on the cross, I believe, and he's referring to all these people that are these predatory people, the power of the dog, and, you know, and there's a lot of themes there with dogs. You know, dogs are loyal, but they also can be fierce, right? They're quiet, but they can be aggressive. And I think that's supposed to be reflected in Phil's character. And by the end of the movie, Phil's character's been tormenting Pete's mom, who has married Phil's brother. And Phil resents her because he thinks that she just wants their money. And so he's been tormenting her to the point of alcoholism. She has tormented him. He has tormented her into becoming an alcoholic. And
that's not the only torment that she lives with. I think it's important to note that her husband had killed himself.
Yes.
You know, before this storyline begins, and so Phil writes a note, you know, at some point in the movie that says that you know, he's getting together with a suicide widow. And the first time I watched it, I was like, suicide widow. I was like, that's an interesting way to write, you know, what he had written. So that must have been language from the book, because today I feel like you wouldn't read the wife of somebody who had killed themselves as a suicide widow, you know. That
is a very interesting observation, that choice of words. Yeah. Probably at that time he's being very literal, that she's a widow and she's a widow by suicide. Her husband killed himself, which, yeah, I didn't even think about that when I originally, when I watched it, to me, it rang out as she's suicidal. But now that you point that out, I think you're right. It's just supposed to be him labeling her very literally in his letter. So in 1920s, maybe that was appropriate. I don't know.
And there's very erotic might not be the right word, but the use of the rope in the boarding house in that room, in looking somewhat like a noose as well, and or, you know, is very, very interesting in how the story plays out, because Phil stays in Peter's room, you know, when he's at the boarding house.
Yeah.
Oh, and well, I mean, it plays into it based on, they show when Peter's in there, they show the rope, and then when Phil's in there, they show the rope, and then the rope at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this movie just did. There's
a lot of visual motifs, that's for sure, and reincorporation of some of those, you know, symbolism throughout the movie. I think it's all very intentional. Jane Campion, obviously, like you said, has planned this movie out very methodically and knows what she's doing. And I love these kind of movies because, again, a lot of it is up to interpretation. There's a lot of things that can be read between the lines, and a lot of it is obvious and some of it isn't. And I think it's a movie that you know, it's great. I really like it. I'm interested
really quick. In the beginning, when I first watched it, the juxtaposition of the voiceover over black in the first shot, I didn't realize until the second watch for sure that it's Peter's voice in the voiceover. And the first shot is Phil Burbank, Benedict's character.
Mm-hmm.
And so on first watch, I immediately assumed that the connection was between the voiceover and Phil in a way that I didn't expect. Because Jane's basically saying in the first minute that this kid is going to protect his mom and their life over everything. And that first image is Phil.
What's the voice? Like, why can't I think of the voiceover? What is
it's over black. It's before anything. Let me well,
I'm trying to think. I just rewatched it too. I'm trying to think. Is it literally just a split, like very brief?
It's very brief, and all he says is like he's talking about that he won't let anything come between the happiness of his happiness and his mother. Like he won't let anything come between that.
Jeez, Pete, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that now because I feel like I must have
watched the first 10 seconds of the movie and you're like, whoa, wait a second, what? She just gave the movie to us.
Well, you know? that get something else I took away from this movie that just makes this even more interesting is I feel like Phil and Pete are supposed to be like a parallel to each other throughout this whole film. They have way more in common than they don't. They're like character dynamics I feel like are a big part of this movie. Between Phil and George, between him and his brother, between Phil and Kirsten Dunst's character, I can't remember the mom's name, between Pete and Phil. I feel like character dynamics are huge in this movie, and obviously the main one being Pete and Phil, their relationship. But I feel like throughout the film, Jane Campion kind of paints them in a way that you can see them relating to each other, which makes their relationship by the end make sense, why they kind of seemingly connect. At least Phil thinks they're connecting. Pete has other plans on his mind. But they're both very.
Let me ask you this. In the beginning, I would challenge the notion just a little bit because Phil is at the table and he says, must have been a real pretty girl that made these flowers, as he's literally fingering a flower.
Yes.
Again, very overtly sexual.
There's a lot of sexual imagery. Yeah. Like symbolism.
And Peter walks over and he says, I made that, And so I think that they parallel in parts, but I think that right from the get-go, we see that Peter is a stronger person internally than Phil is, because he walks right over and he says, no, there wasn't a girl that made that. I made those, and I'm very proud of those. He's
confident. Whereas where he's not a coward, which is ironic because Phil calls him weak, literally to his face later in the film. Says he laughs at him because Pete tells him how when his father hung himself that he discovered him and had to cut him down, and someone told him that he was stronger than he should be, and Phil laughs at him like they were wrong, like you strong. It's like literally says something like that. So I think you're right. I think there's some parallels, but there's a lot of juxtaposition with the characters too, that they are while they have some similarities, they're different. I think one of the similarities that showed up to me was their callousness. I think they both are cold, calculating characters, and there's a distinct moment in the film where Phil is shown castrating bulls with precision and almost like anger, and then Pete is shown dissecting a little cute bunny rabbit in his room. But there's a parallel there, but there's also some juxtaposition about the way they're going about it, right? Because Phil is super, even though he's very precise, he's aggressive and like angry about it. Why aren't you using gloves, Phil? Because I don't need them, right? And then Pete is up in his room, quietly doing it, studying. He's dissecting the rabbit, for his studies, but it was also very weird how he went about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then obviously the end of the movie shows how cold and callous he is, even though he cares for his mother. he's obviously very uncaring for anyone that gets in his way. And I think that just shows kind of a parallel between the two of them. They definitely
you need to watch that beginning, because like he just from the get-go is like, if anything steps between happiness and my mother, you know, I
can't believe I missed that voice. I can't believe I missed that voiceover. I'm sure I heard it and I probably just was zoned out or something. Oh, the screen's black.
It's because it's over black. It's like not something you expect to hear, and then the movie starts. So it's almost it's a weird. It's so weird. If you can pull it up right now,
I know. I was trying. I got my iPad next to me. I was going to try to pull it up since I have it sitting right here.
You should pull it up, because it's so. It blew me away the second time I watched it.
You got it, right? We didn't even talk about the music. The music's so great. Is it during the opening credits?
Maybe.
Do you remember? Can you hear the music playing?
Yeah, I can hear it.
When my father passed, I wanted nothing more than my mother's happiness.
Did you hear it?
Mm-hmm.
For what kind of man would I be if I did not help my mother? If I did not save her?
If I did not save her. Wow. So I feel like,
isn't that interesting?
I feel like now that I'm listening to it, I remember hearing it at the beginning of the movie, but I guess it just didn't register with me.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. So that really, talk about foreshadowing.
I like it's one of those things where she gives you everything that you need to know in the beginning, and the story plays out and you're just amazed by the end. It's just like a tactic, you know.
I love it. I'm glad that you pointed that out to me, because your
video just there you go. Okay.
Yeah, I know it's all screwed up. My stupid camera is being a piece of junk. I'm disappointed in myself that I didn't catch that. I guess it just didn't register with me. It didn't sink in. Usually I'm pretty good about catching those kinds of things, but that definitely, you're right. I mean, that adds a whole nother element to the film for sure. And we didn't even mention this, but as I was playing that, I was reminded the music, Johnny Greenwood scored this film. Johnny Greenwood famously scores pretty much every Paul Thomas Anderson film. He even scored his latest film, Licorice Pizza. And that guy, I mean, his compositions, I mean, he's very famous, obviously, as the lead guitarist of Radiohead, but I think I love it. Excuse me. Sorry. Jeez, Pete. I just burped. That was really gross. I'm sorry. That was very unpleasant. I apologize for the listener if you heard that in here. Oh,
I didn't hear it, so
that was not a good burp. Anyway, Johnny Greenwood, yeah, he was nominated or won the Golden Globe for best score for this film. And I was reading, because of COVID, he was limited on how he could score this film. He could not get an orchestra in terms of gathering restrictions. So he pretty much had to do a lot of this by himself. And what he had to do is through engineering, he layered to make it sound like it's, an orchestra. He had to layer a lot of the music, like the texture. And what he also did, apparently, to imitate the banjo, he decided he didn't want to use a banjo because he didn't like a banjo's sound, but he instead used a cello and plucked. He played the cello by plucking it to kind of mirror that sound, because Phil's character in the film at one point is playing the banjo very expertly and is doing it to mock. We didn't even talk about, I still can't remember her name. What's the mother's name? It's Rose, to mock Rose because she's struggling with the composition on the piano, and he plays it over the top of her to like make fun of her. So to kind of imitate that banjo, he used the cello and plucked it. It has a very kind of eerie, talking about eerie scores in the last film, very eerie kind of foreboding sound to the score in this movie
it has a very empty Western town before the gang rides in, of somebody sitting, lean back with a banjo, ding, 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 ding.
A Sergio Leone.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, no, very much so. Which also reading in an interview with Jane Campion at the beginning, which plays into the entire story, Peter is cutting up and making flowers out of sheets of music. And that's what Phil burns.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Which was, you don't think about it until it's hard to think about it until you read something from the director, but it was all intentional. And that it's so
those are the best films. Those are the best films.
Yeah. So yeah, reading so much about it afterwards also made it more special, because just the challenges that they faced with COVID and whatnot, in making the film, and then just the spontaneity of some of the most beautiful shots.
Oh, we haven't mentioned the cinematography yet. The cinematography in this movie is gorgeous. It's beautiful.
On second watch, did you purposefully look at the mountain when they go and look at it the first time to see if the wolf is there?
I every time, when that showed up, I was trying to look at it very closely. It's so hard. They keep saying it looks like a dog, a barking dog or whatever. That's at least what Pete says at the end of the movie. Yeah, I definitely was looking very closely at that. I think I could kind of see what they were referring to as like the head barking, but I don't know.
Right. I think that's all it was. But when I watched it the second time, the first time they reference it and they show it, I was like, "Is it there? Is it there?" And sure enough, it was. Of course. Yeah.
No, yeah, I love her attention to detail with this film. There's a lot on, and even outside of all the technical aspects and the meticulous, production of the film and the visuals, there's also just this story, the way it's brought to life on the screen. There's a lot of great themes. Obviously the big one that's being discussed is sexuality, especially male sexuality in a time period. Again, the time period to me is very intentional too. And she adapted from a novel, so I'm sure the author's intention was there as well. At a time where, this was very taboo in the 1920s. This is supposed to be 1925, the setting of the film, Right, and you see the magazines at the end and they're not even full nude magazines. They're literally covered up, bodybuilding. Looks like bodybuilding magazine or something. Right.
Yeah. So totally of the time where like full nudity in anything was kind of like a very taboo subject.
Do you think that then again her intention for showing us male nudity with some of the characters, especially with Phil, like, so this is something that stuck out to me, is this film is rated R, but like there's no swearing, there's no violence, unless you consider the scene where they show dissecting and castration, disturbing imagery. Like the movie on Netflix is officially rated R for sexuality and full nudity. It literally says full nudity on Netflix. And there's no female nudity. The only nudity of this film is male frontal nudity and some male butts. I feel like that's even intentional.
Oh yeah, well, I think it went to show this idea that men were very comfortable in going down to the river. I mean, similar to any time period where men were very comfortable getting naked in front of each other. But yeah, it was this taboo idea of like, if any of these men thought that men were attractive, then it was like, well, you best not be getting in the river with us, let me tell you. Which I thought the movie did a great job of, because it's very, closed off in every respect except for these couple scenes, which I think make it more powerful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And well, on the scene where we see Benedict Cumberbatch fully nude as the character Phil, is a scene where he's like doing self-care, which is also I feel like something that was taboo for men. He's like taking care. It's like he's taking care of himself in private. He's doing like a mud bath, on his skin, which is ironic because he's like criticized by his brother for stinking and not washing up at points in the movie. Yet there's this scene of him like very intentionally like cleaning himself and taking care of himself. you know.
That actually gives me an idea, because I believe that the first time we see anybody sunbathing is the guys with the hats on their ding dongs, and they're laying on, I believe they're laying on rocks or sand.
Yeah, on the side of the river. Yep.
Not a necessarily comfortable spot. And when we see Benedict and his character Phil relaxing in the sun, I feel like he's in flowing
grass.
grasses. Yep. You know, it's definitely a more calm atmosphere, which is it's definitely a choice, and it's a great choice now that I look back and think about those two scenes together.
Yeah. Very, again, like we've said many times, intentional. I feel like everything that's what mostly comes across to me with this film, is that every choice has a purpose, no matter how small. Like you mentioned early on, meticulously planned out the movie, and you know, it's a great achievement here. To me, it's one of the best films of 2021. It's in my top 10. I mean, I love this movie. I feel like we could talk about it forever, but I know Andrew here does have plans to go see a movie. He's about to go see Scream 5, so I don't want to take up too much more of his time here.
I still got time.
Well, we can still kind of start to wind it down here.
Yeah.
I didn't have a ton left in my notes here, kind of covered just about everything I wanted to say. Was there anything else that you had on your mind otherwise before we wrap it up, kind of?
Probably, but you know, it comes and goes. As with talking about any movie, you know, it comes and goes as you think about things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I usually, when I have a conversation with a film like this, I tend to go off on tangents, and then I start to think of one thing, and then I think of another thing. It's always hard for me.
Yeah.
I get too excited. Yeah. I can't kind of keep my thoughts in line. But that's how conversation
I did think that I thought the most interesting thing in this movie is when Peter goes out on his own to go cut.
Oh, we didn't talk about the ending. We didn't talk about the ending yet. Let's say that's how we gotta end this, is we gotta talk about the ending. So yeah. So the final act of the movie, Phil teaches Peter how to ride a horse. And the first time he goes out on his own on the horse, and at this point, Peter and Phil are like becoming buddies after he's been kind of a dick to him previously in the movie. And basically at this point, Peter, goes out on his own on the horse and finds a cow that is dead and diseased. And we find out later that anthrax is kind of a cause of some dead and diseased animals in the area. And he cuts. And
we find out that in the beginning. We find that out.
They do mention part of that early too. Yeah, it's mentioned more than once. And he begins cutting rawhide strips from the cow. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about how if you're not really paying attention, because I mentioned this earlier and I never finished my thought, is this is the whole sequence where I kind of got confused on my first watch. He cuts these strips of rawhide, and then it goes to another scene. And earlier in the film, Phil had been creating a rawhide rope with other cows' rawhides from their farm. And he was making the rope for Pete. He was going to give it to him as a gift. Well, and then he ran out of rawhide because Rose gave away his rawhides to a Native American. He was all pissed about it. And then so Pete brings him this diseased rawhide. And earlier in the day, Phil had cut his hand when they were doing something with some like big logs and fencing, I don't know, out on the ranch, and he cuts his hand. I think that's really important, because we see Peter earlier in the film, and we kind of see him as this evildoer in dissecting this rabbit, but he is really dissecting the rabbit in terms of science. He's studying to be a doctor. Yep. At I think an Ivy League school. I don't remember what school he goes to. Yeah, I don't remember what school it was either. But you know, anyways, he's doing this. He's dissecting this rabbit, and there is a scared rabbit underneath this wood pile that they're pulling off, and Phil is saying that they used to play this game with how many logs could you pull off before the rabbit would run out from the wood pile. And at a certain point, Peter goes in and pulls the rabbit out, and the rabbit has a broken leg, and Peter breaks its neck. But he was before he breaks its neck. He was like trying to calm it down, massaging it, trying to, you know. My camera messed up again here.
You're all good.
Sorry, continue your thought.
No. You're totally right. It's totally, you know, he's trying to massage the animal, but right before that is where the big incident happens, where they're trying to pull the logs off, and Phil cuts his hand really bad, and that's what leads to his ultimate demise.
Yeah, and then at the end of the film, as I was talking about just a moment ago, he is creating or finishing the rope using the diseased rawhide gifted to him by Pete unknowingly, and he's mixing the rawhide in the water he's using to soften it, and then so that's going in his cut and his wound. And I love how very deliberately this becomes a very intimate moment between Pete and Phil. Especially with the cigarette. And I watched it on the second time, I was paying close attention. He never allows Phil to touch the cigarette because he knows what's going on in that, you know, that water. There's disease, you know, it's disease. And they are sharing a cigarette, but he always holds it to Phil's lips for him to let him smoke it so that so that it doesn't get touched. Phil never touches the cigarette. And then at the end of the movie, he is handling the diseased rope with gloves. You know, so but this is the part I missed. You are never told as an audience what has happened. You just have to piece it together that when you're watching that he cut the diseased rawhide, right? They show you him doing this, and then he brings rawhide to Phil. But if you're not paying attention, you don't realize he just gave him diseased rawhide, right? From this nasty animal, and then he's mixing his hand in there, and then the next morning he wakes up, he's sick, and he dies. he gets an infection and dies. So it's like, I feel like moment.
I understood it when at the morgue he says anthrax poisoning.
That's when it hit me. At that moment, it kind of hit me, and I'm like, wait. I'm like, now I got to go back and rewatch this because I'm like, I think I just missed. In retrospect, I'm like, okay, I think I see what's happening, but I kind of wasn't. It didn't register with me at first.
Right. No, totally. That's this whole movie is like you're finding stuff out 20, 30 minutes later from something that happened before.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You're like, wait, whoa, what? You know, it's simply amazing. The setup of Rose, Kirsten Dunst's character, of selling the rawhides, that just to let everybody know what this jackass is doing with the rawhides is the rawhides that don't get used, he just burns them.
Because he doesn't want the Native Americans to have them.
Exactly, yeah. And it's this interesting thing where once Kirsten Dunst gives rawhides to the Native Americans, they give her these rawhide gloves that are beautifully made. You know, it's it's such a powerful movie. I had a friend of mine that said, I've never seen a movie that I turned off halfway because nothing happened. And I said,
in reference to this movie?
In reference to this movie. And I was like,
no.
I was like, I think you're talking to the wrong person because I've seen this movie 3 times now, and each time.
And you're like, I'm getting more. Yeah, you're like, I'm taking more away from it every time. It's definitely a movie that for me on rewatch, I was taking more away, and now I want to watch it again when I get a chance.
Oh yeah. A third time, you know, I was reading a back and forth between an interviewer and Jane Campion and the cinematographer Ari Wagner, and the interviewer had said, well, I got a chance to watch it a second time. And Ari Wagner said, I'm really glad that you had the experience of watching it a second time. It's really beautiful a second time.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so true because there is so much packed into this movie. It really is. It's a painting that you have to see several times in order to understand the beauty that went into the making of it, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, and these are my favorite kinds of movies. I mean, one thing that I always, when I put reviews online, one of my main, criticisms or things that I uplift a movie for are rewatchability. I mean, is this a movie that I can go back to? Am I going to get more out of it? And to me, those are the best movies. The best movies are films that you want to go back to, can go back to, and will get more out of it on the second, third, fourth viewing. And this this film definitely has that.
Yep. It's and then he sweeps it under the bed. He sweeps it under the bed at the end of the movie and
with gloves on, smartly with gloves.
With gloves.
And then he smiles after he sees his mother reunited with George. And that's the end of the last shot of the movie. Man, what a powerful final shot. He sees them together, they're happy, he smiles, and that's it. And just with that smile,
I believe coming back from the funeral of Phil's
funeral, which he did not attend. I don't believe Pete went.
I don't think Peter went. No.
So. It's a great end. It's a very chilling ending, and you're like it's so chilling but so effective. And I feel like just talking about the movie with you, it's making me even appreciate, as much as I enjoy it on my own. I feel like I'm just appreciating it that much more on rewatch. But it's a good one. Power of the Dog on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, you got to watch it. Well, with that, Andrew, I think that's a good place to end it. Anything before we wrap things up here? Anything you want to plug? Share with the people. Anyone listening?
I don't know. A band that I'm designing for, Palais Royale. They've got a couple new videos coming out. They have a new album coming out 2022 towards the back end of the year, but they start their North American tour with Youngblood next week. So that's about all I got. So if you get a chance to see one of their shows, hop on out to it.
Well, there you go. There it is. I guess one more thing I'd ask you, if you had to rate these movies out of 10, Tragedy of Macbeth, what would you rate out of 10?
Macbeth, I would probably give 8.5 out of 10.
Power of the Dog,
for how much I liked it, 9 out of 10.
Ooh, look at that. Even as much as you liked it, even only just a 9.
Yeah, well, you gotta save that 10 for those very special movies,
I can agree with you on that. It's hard. Sometimes I give out 10s probably more often than I should, but I'm about right there with I'm about a 9 for both. I think both of them are just about as perfect as they can be for what they're going for. I think they're pretty great movies. I love them both. Well, all right. With that, we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you for listening or watching, depending on where you're watching or listening on YouTube or on the podcast stores. When you're done listening, head over to Twitter. Give me a follow over there at NerdVince, NerdVinc. Instagram, Vincent R. Cook, VincenTRCOOK. Head over to YouTube. Make sure if you're listening on the podcast store, YouTube, we got the episodes over there. Vince the Film Nerd. Subscribe, check those videos out. We're on Apple, Spotify podcasts, Film Nerd podcast. Give me a 5-star review. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and for our egos, please give us a thumbs up.
Give me those thumbs up, baby. Appreciate it. Love
because I will not fall asleep at night if you give me a thumbs down.
Hey, YouTube got rid of their thumbs down system. Did you not know that?
Good for them. They are catering to a crowd like me.
They are no longer displaying dislikes on their videos. You can only the content creator is able to see they're calling it feedback. So interesting little tidbit there from
anybody that dislikes any of these videos. It's not real feedback. Only thumbs up are real feedback.
Yeah, don't be a dick. Come on now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, until next time, I'm Vince, guest Andrew Johnson, Film Nerd Podcast, episode 32. Go watch some movies.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel the need for speed.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?